The story of Eheji the hunter, the last hunt of a brave man. The red earth of Udo clung stubbornly to the soles of every foot that walked it. It was soil that birthed warriors, nurtured farmers, and embraced the dead with equal gentleness. In this humble village, within the embrace of Edo State's thick and whispering forest, there lived a man named Eheji, a man whose name would one day be carried on the winds that rustled the treetops, whose story would be wept over in marketplaces and remembered in midnight prayers. Eheji Osamidiaman was not born a warrior, nor did he ever wear a uniform or carry medals. His word was the forest, its secrets, sounds, and shadows. From a young age, he moved through the underbrush like a ghost, learning the language of birds, the signs of fresh animal tracks, and the best timber to fell for his sawmill. He worked with dignity, cutting wood with the precision of an artist and the strength of one who had known hardship. He was the sort of man who gave freely without expecting in return. When a neighbor's son fell ill, Eheji sold his prized hunting rifle to pay for the boy's medicine. When rain washed away the crops, he worked extra hours to help rebuild the communal barn. Yet, for all his quiet strength, the world did not spare him pain. His wife, Itohon, often said Eheji carried sadness in his eyes. Not the kind you see in men defeated by life, but the kind buried deep, like fire under ash. They had 3 children, Osaro, just 10, curious and headstrong, little Isiosa, age 7, with eyes like her father's and questions that never stopped, and baby Edomudi, still learning to say a papa. On that Easter morning, as the village prepared to gather at the church, Eheji kissed each child on the forehead and told Itohon he would be back before evening. He had planned to check his trap lines deep in the forest and gather firewood along the way. The forest was his friend. But friends, like fate, are not always predictable. The forest greeted Eheji with its usual chatter, the soft movement of leaves, the shrill calls of monkeys, the creaking limbs above. He moved swiftly, each step placed with purpose. But something was wrong. The birds were too quiet. The wind too still. Years in the woods had taught him to listen beyond what could be heard. Then he saw a flash of movement, unnatural, sharp. He crouched behind a thick tree and watched. Men in dark clothes, holding rifles. Not hunters. Not villagers. They moved like predators, but they weren't after game. And then he saw hostages. 8 of them. 2 women, one clutching a toddler, 4 men, bound and bruised, a teenage girl, and a boy no older than Osoro. Their eyes were sunken, their mouths gagged, and fear clung to them like sweat. Eheji's heart pounded. He could have fled. Could have turned back and told the authorities. But help would take hours. Minutes might be all these people had. He crept back, using the forest cover to scout the area. He counted 4 kidnappers at the camp and possibly 2 more patrolling. They were laughing, smoking, casually checking their weapons. It was a suicide mission. But Eheji thought of Osaro. He thought of that young boy. He thought of what would happen if he did nothing. He took a deep breath and cocked the old Dane gun he had borrowed that morning, nothing fancy, but enough to make noise. Enough to disrupt. He aimed at the sky and fired. The gunshot cracked through the silence like thunder, startling birds into flight and sending the kidnappers into a frenzy. Eheji didn't wait. He charged forward, waving his arms and yelling in Ezen, "Run! I know the forest. This way!" For a heartbeat, the hostages froze. Then one of the men stumbled to his feet and pulled off his gag. The woman with the toddler stood, clutching the child to her chest. Eheji ran to them, slashing at ropes with his hunting knife. "Move! Now!" He led them through a narrow trail only he would have known, a path covered with hanging vines and flanked by swampy ground that slowed pursuit. Behind them, gunshots rang out. A bullet whistled past his ear. He didn't stop. Even when he slipped and skinned his palm. Even when the teenage girl cried out from a twisted ankle. He carried her. By the time they reached a thick grove near the river, he had led them nearly 2 kilometers through tangled underbrush. He told them to hide and stay quiet. He left them with a promise: wait till night. Follow the stream north. You'll reach Ogbunen. He turned back alone. Eheji had no illusions. The kidnappers would not let this go. And they had seen his face. He circled back, setting crude traps from vines and sharpened sticks. He laid false trails, kicked over branches, anything to buy the hostages time. But they were faster than he hoped, and angrier. He heard them before he saw them, shouting in Pidgin and Edo, cursing him. He aimed again, fired another warning shot. Then they caught him. There was no honor in it. One fired and missed. Another threw a rock that hit his shoulder. He staggered. Then they came at him with logs and fists. He fought. Oh, how he fought. He broke one man's nose, stabbed another in the thigh. But there were too many. They beat him until the ground drank his blood and the forest screamed in silence. His last words, whispered into the soil, were for Itohon: take care of our children. It was late the next evening before the villagers heard the news. A passerby found the hostages stumbling out of the forest, dazed, weeping. They told the story of a man who had saved them. A man who fought like a lion. When the search party found Eheji's body, it was surrounded by the signs of battle: broken sticks, trampled leaves, blood. One of his hands still gripped the hilt of his knife. He had died on his feet. The village mourned. Not just Udoegwe, but the entire Ezen Southeast community. Men wept openly. Women wailed and tore their wrappers. The town square became a shrine of palm fronds and candles. At his burial, a community elder stood and declared, Eheji Osamidiaman was not just a hunter. He was our hero. He was our shield. Itohon, in tears, held her children close. She whispered, you will grow up knowing your father was a brave man. The news breaks. The story of Eheji's final act spread like wildfire. At first, it traveled by mouth, from forest to village, then from hamlet to town. By the third day, it had crossed borders. Radio stations in Benin City shared the tale. A local journalist wrote a moving piece titled, The Hunter Who Became Our Shield. Social media picked it up. Photos of his burial and the rescued hostages sparked an online outpouring of emotion. People demanded justice. They demanded recognition. They demanded that the name Eheji Osamidiama not fade into the bush paths where he fell. The state governor dispatched a delegation to Udo-Egwe. Among them was the Commissioner for Security and top police brass. They arrived with condolences and a brown envelope, a token the villagers quietly accepted, but many whispered it wasn't enough. Standing at the gravesite, one official said, this man gave his life so others could live. His name would be submitted for national honor. The villagers said nothing. But their silence wasn't disapproval. It was mourning too deep for words. The kidnappers did not escape untouched. Local hunters, emboldened by Eheji's sacrifice, took to the forest in numbers not seen in years. The state police, often criticized for their sluggish response, launched a rare joint operation with the army. Drones swept over the Ogbenenudo belt. Patrols were stationed. Traps were found. Camps were raided. 4 of the kidnappers were captured within 2 weeks. 2 were killed in a gunfight near Obozagban. Others melted back into the forest, into the shadows from which they came. But justice, like a slow river, continued to flow. One of the hostages, a young woman named Oseyuki, later stood before cameras and said, I was going to die in that forest. I had said goodbye in my heart. But this man, Eheji, he came like lightning. Like thunder. I owe my life to him. Back in Udo-Egwe, Eheji's family moved through their days like people underwater. Time dragged. Noise felt distant. Itohon wore black every day. Her hair was wrapped in silence. She would sometimes wake in the middle of the night and walk to the tree where he once carved their names as teenagers. Osaro stopped speaking for a week. The boy who once asked endless questions now stared out the window with dry eyes and clenched fists. One day, he whispered, "When I grow up, I'll protect people like my father did. I am proud of you, father." The village rallied. Fundraisers were held. The local church created a trust fund. A widows' council took turns helping Itohon farm her cassava plot. But what she missed most was his voice. His laugh. His warm hand resting on her back as they watched the firecracker at night. 6 months later, the community primary school was renamed Eheji Memorial School for Courage and Learning. A marble plaque was erected in front of the school gate. It read, "In honor of one who chose others over himself. Who walked into fire, so others could live. Who taught us that true heroes wear humility, not capes." Children from neighboring villages came to attend. In Abuja, on Democracy Day, the president read out the names of several honorees. Then, he paused. "This year," he said, "we recognize not a politician, not a general, but a man whose bravery humbled a nation. Posthumously, we confer on Mr. Eheji Osamidioman the National Medal of Civil Valor." A framed citation was presented to Itohon by the Minister of Interior. Cameras clicked. Politicians applauded. But for Itohon, the most powerful moment came later, when a stranger approached her quietly, tears in his eyes, and said, "Madam, your husband saved my sister. I came all the way from Lagos to say thank you." Years passed. Edomudi, once a baby, grew into a young man. He would often sit by the forest edge, staring into the green sea of trees and listening. "Do you hear him?" he once asked his mother. She smiled sadly. "What do you hear?" "The wind. It sounds like Papa calling birds." Eheji's story became folklore in Esenland. Children acted out his story in school plays. Hunters told tales of how his spirit now guards the forest trails. A mural of him, rifle slung over shoulder and eyes set with purpose, was painted on the side of a community center in Benin City. His name was whispered during local safety meetings, invoked during peace marches, written on t-shirts of those campaigning against rural banditry. His memory became a movement. Eheji died without riches. But he left behind something far greater. A community awakened. A government jolted. A forest that once echoed with fear now speaks of hope. And a generation that now knows what it means to stand for others, even if it means you do not return. Let his name be a drumbeat in our hearts. Let his memory be a call to action. Let the world know that in the forest of Edo, a man once walked into danger so that others could walk free. Eheji did not just die a brave man. He lived a righteous one. This story is not just about bravery, it's a reminder of the darker threats in our society, of the menace of kidnapping and violence that plagues rural communities. But instead of fear, it teaches preparedness, vigilance, and unity. Eheji knew the odds. He faced armed men with a single old gun and nothing but his instincts. Yet, he chose to act, not because he lacked fear, but because he refused to let fear rule him. His story teaches us that courage doesn't come from being fearless, it comes from being brave despite fear. Eheji did not live to hear the songs they now sing about him. But his children will walk with pride, knowing their father stood for something eternal. His legacy was not in material things, but in lives saved, in hearts touched, in the village he protected. Here are lessons we should learn from this true life story. What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others lives on forever. Evil thrives in silence. Communities must rise and protect one another. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more interesting videos.